This isn't the video I had planned for this week. I actually already did a video. It was almost 20 minutes long. I liked the subject. I thought I did pretty well with it. And then I realized that I talked about something in the other video and I forgot to explain part of the reason why I did the video. So I'm going to do this video now, and I'm going to tell a story, a little bit of truth, and then when I put out the video after that, whether it's next Thursday or some other day, then at least I can refer back to this video for context. So here's the story. I've mentioned multiple times I was a military kid. Born in 1959, born in Texas, lived in Tokyo, lived here in central New York, lived in northern Maine. But the most crucial place I ever lived was in Kansas City, Missouri. When my dad went to Vietnam, my mother and I ended up living with my grandmother in Kansas City. Now, when they had bought that house in 1954, it was considered a middle-class neighborhood. It had nice houses, they all had gardens, and they had a nice school in the area, you know, elementary school, and the kids got bused to the high school, and everything was kind of nice. By 1969, it was a ghetto. There were a few nice houses on the street. My grandmother's house looked nice. It had issues that we discovered over the time we were living there. But in general, it was a ghetto. And it wasn't just our street. It was most of the streets around. It was nothing someone like me was prepared for. Just not prepared at all. Being an only child of an only child and having a mother who liked to dote on me, every morning she would have my clothes picked out and she would put some stuff in my hair and she would brush my hair. And I always looked really nice. So now it's time to go to the new school. And, you know, at this point, I had no idea it was a ghetto. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until a few years after I left Kansas City that I realized I was living in the ghetto. But I get taken to the school, and I'm enrolled, and I'm taken to the classroom that I'm going to be in. And I was stunned. Every kid in the school was black. Every kid in my class was black. Actually, not in the school. Every kid in the school was black except for one. I can't even remember his name, but he was Mexican. And you know what? They all liked him. And initially, they all hated me. Why did they hate me? Because I dressed better. That was the first thing. As I looked around at these kids, there were a couple who were dressed nice, but nothing like me. And a lot of them were dirty. A lot of them had clothes that had rips in them. The shoes had rips in them. Hair not combed or anything. And what became a pattern in the 2 weeks I was in that class, and I'll come back to this, what became a pattern was the teacher would spend the first 45 minutes to an hour grabbing a kid and taking them into the bathroom, because every classroom had its own bathroom, something else I wasn't used to, by the way, and would wash these kids because they didn't wash at home. She couldn't do anything about their clothes, but she was going to make sure the kids were clean in her class. And the education that they had was pretty way back. In other words, where I had lived before I moved to Kansas City, I thought I had a traditional 5th grade education, even though I left after a month and a half. But I had had this progression. I get to Kansas City, they're still reading Dick and Jane. They weren't reading anything that I had been reading before I left. They were still learning how to add. They hadn't even got into subtraction. They knew about money, but they never equated money with math. So that's where they were. There was no history. There was no English, except for their little bit of reading. There was no science, no astronomy, nothing like that. It was weird. The teacher didn't know what to do with me. The kids knew what they wanted to do with me. That wasn't good. I'm 10 years old. I'm a little kid at that time. And I had never been in a fight. Turns out they fought a lot. They fought almost every single day. Okay, forget that. They fought every day. Someone fought every single day. And before the first week was over, there was a plot for a bunch of kids who were going to jump me and beat me up. And oddly enough, a couple of bigger kids came to my defense because they didn't like the idea that a bunch of people were going to pick on a smaller kid, because I was a smaller kid. And they didn't care that I dressed better. What their thought was, he hasn't done anything to anybody. We're not putting up with this. So I had some protectors, which was really interesting. They got suspended for fighting for me, but that's just how that was. So it was a rough 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, it was decided to pull me out of class. The teacher couldn't do anything with me. She didn't have time to deal with me. The school only went up to 6th grade. Obviously, they weren't anywhere close to me either. So after 2 weeks, I was pretty much alone. I have to put it that way, pretty much, because I used to run errands for both the principal and the vice principal. I still had to do, recess with some of these kids. And recess was kind of a dangerous time because you got all the kids out there. Everything had concrete. You had a basketball hoop with no net. And a lot of those kids didn't play basketball. This was a different time period in Kansas City. You know, later on, a lot of kids would be playing basketball and doing whatever, but in 1970, it wasn't happening. So, kids sometimes got into fights, and kids tried to find a way to basically stay away from those who they may end up having fights with. Now, over the course of time, I started getting a few kids who were kind of on my side. Ended up with a best friend named Wendell. There was another one named Marvin, but he was 5 years older than me, and he went to the high school. By the way, they wanted to send me to the high school, and Mom shut that down. You're not sending my 10-year-old kid to that high school. Thank you, Mom. She saved my life, probably. But I had one kid named Odell. He was in the class that I was supposed to be in, and he lived around the corner. And like I said, over the course of the time I was there, I started to see different types of things. For instance, the first time I went by Odell's house, I didn't go in, I went by Odell's house. It was many months later. And there were no windows on the house. Everything was boarded up. They didn't have electricity, which meant they had no air conditioning. They had no heat. They had blankets. And his father and mother were both legally blind. And his oldest sister was legally blind, but at least she could see something. And that's when I started to get my real taste of what living in the ghetto was like. Like I said, my grandmother's house was kind of nice. I didn't appreciate the rats. I was scared of the roaches and all the other big bugs that I saw from time to time. No wonder I'm jumpy now when it comes to those kinds of things. But yeah, it was a ghetto. It really was. And what ended up happening was my dad came back from Vietnam early. He'd gotten shot. He didn't tell me, but he came back, showed up just as the new school year was starting. I was getting ready to start 6th grade. He came back. He was back early, and he went to school with me the next day, and he had half a body cast on. Everything changed on that day because they all thought he'd been shot in Vietnam. Now, I didn't know he'd been shot in Vietnam. He never told me. He didn't tell anyone else that. But it changed everything. I got a lot of publicity out of that, and kids started treating me very well. And I got to basically help out in teaching the first and second graders reading. So it gave me something to do. So what ends up happening is we leave Kansas City beginning of December, and we make the drive to northern Maine. We stop off in my dad's hometown, Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Then we make the drive to Limestone, Maine. I'm not even going to tell that story right now. But let's just say that the day we got there, the next morning, it was 35 below zero. And the car not only wouldn't start, it wouldn't move. They had to send a tow truck over and lift it and take it to a garage to thaw for 24 hours before it would even move. They took the battery out to charge it for that 24 hours so that when the car was ready to move, it was ready to start. That was a common theme, by the way, for the 5 winters we were there. So now I'm up in northern Maine. I'm on an air base where things are somewhat back to normal as they can be in a cold environment. But I had gotten used to being around all these black kids. And so I didn't really know what to do with myself. I didn't know, how to talk to anyone or anything like that. And it turned out that the school participated in a program where you could buy these little paperback books on all kinds of subjects. And so I bought my first Black history book about Frederick Douglass. And this opened my eyes up because I had never been taught anything about any black heroes. Never. So I started buying more of these books. And then I learned about Martin Luther King Jr. and about Malcolm X and all these other people. And then I thought, wow, this is interesting stuff. I need to go talk to some people about this. And it turned out nobody wanted to talk about it. Most of them didn't know any of the people I was telling them about, but they didn't want to talk about it. None of the black kids wanted to talk about it. And it wasn't until I had a friend named Carl at some point. I think it was by my 3rd year up there or whatever. And he had a stepfather. His youngest brother, there were 4 of them, and his youngest brother, his stepfather was the real father of him. But in his own way, he was kind of militant. I didn't necessarily know that at the time, but he's in the military. And he was very strict with the kids. I mean, they couldn't play in the grass. If they got anything on their clothes, it was a whipping. I didn't really understand this man at all. I'd never met anyone like that. But one day, I'm outside talking to Carl, and I happened to mention something about the Black history thing. And his stepfather overheard me, and he came out. And we had about a 30 to 45 minute conversation on this Black history stuff that I've been reading about. And it gained me respect. And I was the only person who was not a family member ever invited into the house, because now I had someone to talk to. And so I had told him about my experience in Kansas City and living in the ghetto. And I can't remember where he was from, but he was of that same thing. And he decided to go into the service because he wanted discipline. He wanted something else for his life. And that's how he wanted to raise the kids. And, as I was talking to him about it, my mind said, yes, I've got this nice life living on a military base. And by the way, you live on a military base, you don't realize you're not making that much money. I mean, the most money my dad ever made before he retired was $15,000 a year. That's it. But most people in the military don't make that much money, but things cost a lot less if you live on base. So you don't know until later on when you get into, quote unquote, the real world. But it was at that moment when I realized, you know what, this is something I have to talk about. Yes, the other black kids up here don't seem to care about it. Military life, they're doing their thing, but I cared about it. I met this man, he cared about it. There was some other man who decided he was going to try to set up a version of a black church on the military base. Yeah, I didn't get along that well with that premise. I'm just going to tell you the truth. But when I moved to New York, after my dad retired, that's when I really started, because I moved here, Liverpool, went to a school with 3,800 kids, less than 50 black kids, living on this street now, where I'm the only black person on the street. And I've talked about other adventures that I've had in being black. And I say that because there are some people who will say, well, they've never lived the experience, or you don't know what it's like, who may not necessarily feel the way I do in understanding that there are a lot of people who grew up in what's called the inner city, or didn't grow up in the suburbs, who didn't go to schools that could teach them everything they needed to know to have a fair chance in this world. Didn't mean they were dumb, it just means they didn't have the chance. For instance, in this area, the suburbs all had laptops to give kids to take home. That doesn't happen in the city. I mean, maybe it does now, but for a while they had nothing. And then when the school budgets got slashed, I don't know what happened at that point. And this is how come I see things from a different view, because it's not all about me. It's about other people. I have to tell the truth. I have had a pretty good life. I've had some experiences that were due to race that have bothered me. But overall, I have the choice to decide to either stick by myself, stay alone, stay my little introverted self here in the house, or go out and hang around some people, or hang around a group, or go out to eat. Everyone doesn't have that luxury. And so I stand up for those who may not get the opportunity to communicate what their issues are. And that's how come I took a stand when I was working as an employee in hospitals to say, we need to get some more minorities in here. We need to diversify this place. And that's why, as a consultant, when I've been in certain places, I've said, you know, this place is kind of missing out. To have other people tell me, what do you mean? There's black people working here. There's none who are a director. There's almost none in any, technical areas. There's almost none in billing or whatever. Or they're all in billing, but there's still no leadership. I bring this up. A lot of people don't like it, but you know who does like it? The black people. Because they see me and they say, wait, there's someone who's made it in his own way, and he's standing up for us. Because they're scared to stand up for themselves. If it's got to be me, it's got to be me. So I've told this story here. This is all true. This is how come I write my blog, where leadership and diversity and healthcare. And that's why I've done these series of videos over the past few weeks. So I've told this, so when the next video comes out, and I link to it, if you've seen this one, you won't have to watch this again, because now you'll know when I get to a certain part in that video, that's what he was talking about. Anyway, my name is Mitch Mitchell. Think about subscribing. I'm not going to be talking about this stuff forever, or maybe I will. We'll have to see. But think about subscribing, like it, comment on it if you want to, and I'll talk to y'all later.